Wow. It's kind of crazy how fast things can change on the world stage, isn't it? I mean, just a week ago, maybe we were talking about, I don't know, summer plans. And now,
And now we're looking at this really deeply worrying escalation between India and Pakistan. Two nuclear states?
it's a very stark reminder, yeah, of just how volatile things are there. It seems like that awful attack in Pahalgam was the spark, really.
Definitely the catalyst. It set off this chain reaction, and well, here we are in this incredibly tense situation.
Exactly. And that's what we want to dig into today. We're doing a deep dive into why we're suddenly seeing this, almost warlike situation, specifically looking at India's Operation Sindoor after the Pahalgam attack.
Hmm.
We've pulled together quite a bit of material, news reports, analyses, some crucial historical background, stuff you really need to understand the conflict.
Yeah, and the goal here is to get past the sort of breaking news headlines, right? To really get under the surface and understand the currents that swept us here.
What are the key things the sources tell us? Why did this happen? And maybe most importantly, what could happen next?
Exactly. Where do we even begin?
Okay, so let's start where the sources suggest it all really originates.
Yeah.
The 1947 partition of British India, it feels like that event just casts this incredibly long shadow.
Oh, absolutely. You can't understand the present without it. The partition, based on that two-nation theory, separate countries for Hindus and Muslims, it was just seismic.
Creating India and Pakistan.
Right. But the process itself was horrifically violent. Mass displacement, unbelievable brutality, millions forced to move.
And the sources really talk about the trauma, the psychological scars on both sides.
Deep, deep scars. These narratives of collective victimhood, animosity, they've shaped national identities, makes compromise so incredibly difficult even generations later.
And that border, the Radcliffe Line, the sources painted as almost arbitrary, drawn in a rush by the British.
Pretty much. It cut through communities, ignored demographics in places like Punjab and Bengal. It was bound to cause problems.
Setting the stage for immediate disputes.
Instantly. Plus, all that violence and displacement, it just bred this deep suspicion, this blame game, narratives passed down, coloring almost every interaction ever since.
And then, almost right away, as our sources detail, Kashmir just explodes onto the scene, the flashpoint.
Yeah, and Kashmir was complicated from the start. You had a Muslim-majority population.
But ruled by a Hindu Maharaja, Hari Singh.
Exactly. And he initially apparently wanted independence for Kashmir, didn't want to join either India or Pakistan. But then you had these tribal militias invading from the Pakistan side in October 47. Pakistan denies direct involvement, but they were certainly supportive.
Right.
So Hari Singh, facing this invasion, turned to India for help and, well, acceded to India, signed the Instrument of Accession.
In exchange for military aid. But Pakistan's view, based on the sources, was totally different. They didn't accept that accession.
Not at all. They contested its legality, its legitimacy, argued the Maharaja didn't represent the Muslim majority's will. Plus, they pointed to geography, Kashmir bordering Pakistan.
And that fundamental disagreement that sparked the first war.
Immediately, the First Indo-Pakistani War, 1947 to 48.
Which ended how?
Well, it ended with Kashmir divided, along what eventually became the line of control, the Lasi. But it wasn't a political solution, just a ceasefire line.
Brokered by the UN.
Yes, a UN ceasefire, but the core dispute, totally unresolved. And Kashmir just got woven into the very fabric of both nations' identities, their security anxieties.
For Pakistan, it's often framed as, the unfinished business of partition?
Yeah.
Protecting fellow Muslims?
Something like that, yes. And for India, it became about territorial integrity, its secular identity. Hugely symbolic for both.
And sadly, this wasn't the end of the fighting over Kashmir. The sources map out the later wars pretty clearly.
Yeah, you see this pattern. 1965, Pakistan's Operation Gibraltar tried to spark an uprising in Indian-administered Kashmir. India pushed back hard, and it became a full-scale war.
Right.
Then 1971, that was mainly about East Pakistan becoming Bangladesh, of course, a huge event. But there was also fighting on the Western Front, including in Kashmir.
Right. And more recently.
Kargil, 1999. That was Pakistani forces infiltrating high-altitude posts on the Indian side of the Lasi in the Kargil district. India launched a major offensive to push them back.
It's just stark, isn't it? Kashmir again and again. So let's dig into that dispute itself a bit more. India says the accession was legal, done deal. Pakistan says no way.
That's the absolute crux of it. Now, the UN Security Council did pass resolutions early on, called for a plebiscite of vote for Kashmiris to decide their own future.
But that never happened. Why not?
Well, it's complicated. Both sides had conditions. India initially agreed, but later argued that Pakistan hadn't withdrawn its forces as required, and their continued interference made a fair vote impossible. Pakistan insisted on the plebiscite as a fundamental right.
So strategic priorities got in the way. India worried about secession, maybe encouraging other separatist groups.
That was likely a major concern, yes. And for Pakistan, the plebiscite was almost non-negotiable. So the conditions were never met, the vote never held.
And India's position hardened over time.
It did. India increasingly emphasized that Kashmir is an integral, inseparable part of India, and they pushed for bilateral talks, pointing to the Simla Agreement from 1972.
Signed after the 71 war. What did that say?
It stressed resolving issues directly between India and Pakistan without outside interference. So India often cites Simla when rejecting third-party mediation on Kashmir.
And then layer on top of this the insurgency that started in India-administered Kashmir around 1989.
Right. A long-running, often violent insurgency, and India has consistently forcefully accused Pakistan of fueling it.
Supporting militant groups.
Yes, groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed Champev. India alleges they operate from Pakistan with support, even direct help from Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI.
Pakistan denies direct involvement, but the sources say they've offered political, maybe moral support over the years, seeing them as freedom fighters.
That perspective certainly exists within Pakistan, or has at times. It highlights the completely different ways the two countries view this. For India, it's cross-border terrorism, pure and simple, asymmetric warfare targeting civilians.
Undermining stability.
Definitely. Whereas Pakistan, or elements within it, might frame it as a response to what they see as Indian occupation or oppression in Kashmir, a legitimate resistance.
These clashing views, they lead directly to this grim issue of cross-border terrorism. The sources list some horrific attacks.
Yeah, major attacks that dramatically escalated tensions. The 2001 attack on India's parliament in Delhi.
Nearly brought them to war then.
Very nearly. Then the 2008 Mumbai attacks, coordinated shootings and bombings, just devastating. India blamed Lati, alleged ISI links.
Huge international incident.
Massive.
Okay.
And then the 2019 Pulwama attack, a suicide bombing against an Indian paramilitary convoy claimed by GEM.
And that led to those Indian airstrikes inside Pakistan, right? The surgical strike.
Exactly. India retaliated by bombing what it said was a GEM training camp in Balakot, Pakistan. That was a major escalation at the time.
Okay, so that sets the stage. We had Pulwama, the Balakot strikes. But what makes this current crisis, triggered by the 2025 Pahalgam attack, feel different?
Well, the attack itself is particularly shocking, targeting tourists, civilians in Pahalgam. 26 people killed. Just brutal.
No ambiguity about targeting non-combatants.
None. And India's reaction was immediate, pointing the finger straight at Pakistan-backed groups. Pakistan, for its part, denied it strongly, offered an independent probe.
And responsibility was claimed by a group called Kashmir Resistance. But sources link them to Latai.
That's the assessment, yes. A likely front group. But what the sources really emphasize is the mood in India after Pahalgam. Intense public anger, huge pressure on the government to respond forcefully.
A sense of enough is enough.
Precisely, which leads us directly to India's military response, Operation Sindoor.
Launched just a couple of weeks later, early May 6th, 7th.
Yes. India announced it had targeted 9 sites described as terrorist infrastructure inside Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Pakistan acknowledged strikes on 6 locations.
And when India says terrorist infrastructure, what do they usually mean? Training camps.
Training camps, yes. Logistics hubs, command centers for these militant groups, often claim to be in fairly remote areas, but sometimes near populated zones, too.
And the locations mentioned are quite specific. Muzaffarabad, Kotli, in Pakistan-administered Kashmir.
But also deeper inside Pakistan proper, like Bahawalpur, reportedly GEM headquarters, and Meridke, near Lahore, said to be Lati's base.
Striking those would be significant.
Very significant. Now, casualty figures, as you'd expect, are disputed. Pakistan reported civilian deaths, over 35 injured. India claimed hitting militants, neutralizing a larger number, though details are scarce.
And India's justification, how do they frame it?
They called the strikes focused, measured, and non-escalatory. The key claim was that they only targeted the terror infrastructure, not the Pakistani military or state itself.
But using missiles this time. The sources stress that's a big difference from the 2019 strikes.
Absolutely crucial difference. The 2019 Balakot strike involved fighter jets crossing the Lost Sea to drop bombs. Using missiles, potentially launched from within Indian territory, signifies a different capability and perhaps a lower risk to Indian personnel, but a potentially higher escalatory risk overall. It's a much more assertive military posture.
So a major escalation. How did Pakistan react?
Predictably, with fury. They condemned Operation Sindoor in the strongest terms, an act of war, a cowardly attack.
And there were initial reports, unverified claims, about shooting down Indian planes, capturing soldiers.
Yes, those claims circulated early on but lacked independent confirmation. Standard fog of war, perhaps, or propaganda efforts.
But the official stance was a vow to retaliate.
A very clear vow. Retaliation would come forcefully at a time and place of Pakistan's choosing. And reports indicate the Pakistan Air Force went on high alert, jets were scrambled. The risk of this spinning out of control felt and feels incredibly high.
And beyond the military posturing, the diplomatic fallout was immediate too, right?
Swift and severe. Diplomatic ties basically severed. Expulsion of diplomats, recalling nationals, border shut down, airspace closed, classic crisis measures.
But then India took another big step, suspending the Indus Waters Treaty. That feels huge.
It's massive. That treaty has survived multiple wars since 1960. It governs how the waters of the Indus River system are shared. India cited Pakistan's alleged terror support as justification for suspending it. The long-term implications for water security, for stability, huge.
And Pakistan threatened to pull out of the Simla Agreement in response.
Reportedly, yes, which would unravel another key framework for bilateral relations, the one emphasizing direct talks. It really feels like the guardrails are coming off.
It's been the international reaction, lots of concern.
Definitely. Alarm bells ringing everywhere. The UN, the Security Council, calls for calm, de-escalation. The Secretary General offered to mediate, though neither side seems receptive right now.
And the major powers, U.S., China, Russia.
All urging restraint. The U.S., China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, they all have stakes in regional stability. Iran even offered to mediate. Nobody wants to see this escalate further.
President Trump called it a shame, hoped it ends quickly. But the core worry is obvious.
Nuclear weapons. Any conflict between these two carries that terrifying potential shadow. That's why the international pressure for de-escalation is so intense.
So where does that leave things now? What's the current state, according to the sources?
Relations are, frankly, in the gutter. Probably the lowest point in decades. Military forces on both sides are highly mobilized along the Loch Sea and the border. The risk of miscalculation, an accidental clash sparking something bigger, is dangerously high.
And those suspended treaties, the Indus Waters, potentially Simla, that damages future prospects, doesn't it?
Immensely. It removes established mechanisms for managing disputes and cooperation, makes rebuilding trust, whenever that might happen, much, much harder. The situation is just incredibly volatile, unpredictable.
And communication channels are basically gone.
It seems like it. Which, again, in a nuclearized environment is incredibly dangerous. No hotline, no back-channel talks happening effectively, it seems. Increases the risk of misinterpreting actions or intentions.
So if we try to just boil it all down, what are the absolute key drivers that got us here, to this precipice?
Okay, boiling it down. First, you absolutely have that deep historical root, the trauma and bitterness of partition in 1947, still echoing.
Still shaping everything.
Second, the Kashmir dispute itself, unresolved, deeply emotional, central to both national identities, constant source of friction.
Right.
Third, the whole issue of cross-border militancy and terrorism, competing narratives, constant accusations, real attacks causing real anger and demands for retaliation.
Like Pulwama and now Pahalgam.
Exactly, which brings us to the immediate trigger, the Pahalgam attack. That specific act of violence directly prompted India's response, Operation Sindoor.
And that operation, being missile strikes, represents a significant jump in escalation.
A very significant jump. So you put all that together, history, Kashmir, terrorism, the specific trigger, and the escalatory response, and you arrive at today.
Which is exceptionally strained relations, diplomacy broken down, and this truly terrifying potential for things to get much worse between two nuclear-armed neighbors.
Yeah, deeply worrying.
It really is, and it makes you think, doesn't it? Given this history, this complex web of grievances, the current brinkmanship, what could a real path to de-escalation even look like? Is lasting peace even conceivable in this landscape? That's maybe the question to leave you, the listener, with. What would it actually take?